Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to our webinar on driving logistics and transportation with a semantic metadata hub. We're all really glad that you could join us today. I am Lisa Bos. I am our Senior Vice President of Technology. That means I'm part of our professional services team. So if we have customers watching today, then some of you may have worked with me in that context. We also have Jim Morris with us. He is a senior information scientist working as a solution architect in our sales team, helping to educate folks about Semaphore and Smartlogic, but also I know has worked with some of you as customers as well. So a few housekeeping items before we dive in. This webinar is in broadcast mode, which means that you can talk all you want. We will not hear you because the participants are muted. But we do ask that if you have questions as we go along, that you go ahead and enter those in the GoToWebinar panel. You can see an image of it here. So take a second now and find that. Enter those as we go along, and at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session and get to those as many of those as we're able to. If we can't get to your question, we'll try to follow up if it makes sense. Okay, we are recording the broadcast as well. After we're done here today, we will send out information about how to access the recording to all of you so you can share them with your colleagues if you like to. And meanwhile then, let's get going. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Smartlogic, which is our company, as well as Semaphore, our products, and our idea of a semantic metadata hub, how Semaphore fits into that. And that will lead into Jim giving you a more concrete example of Semaphore operating as part of a semantic metadata hub for one of our customers in the area of medicinal logistics and transportation. So that's the fun part. We'll get there as fast as we can. And like I said, when we're done, we'll have a Q&A session, so we'll get to your questions at that point. All right, so when we talk about a semantic metadata hub, we are, of course, talking about metadata management, which is what probably most of you spend a lot of your time thinking about as well. And I don't feel like I need to explain metadata management to you. You know what metadata is and why managing it is important. But what we have certainly come to understand over the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years or so is that managing metadata is being done as a way to drive today's digital business. It's not being done for technical reasons. It's not because we're just looking to understand the provenance of information and so on. We're looking for insight. And in fact, Gartner says specifically that metadata builds the foundations for describing, inventorying, and understanding data for multiple use cases, such as information governance or analytics. And of course, there are more of those. And trying to do this and do this well is not new. Really, if you look at the history of metadata management, if you do a search on the web, you'll find interesting stories from 4,000 years ago when librarians were first physically tagging books in libraries with metadata to help them to find the books that they were looking for amongst the many that they had. And of course, our issues now are much bigger than that with the scale of information we have and the digital amount of content that we all encounter in our work every day. And so a lot of us have been working on this metadata management problem for a long time, but our experiences have not been what we wanted. We're not trying to do a technical exercise. We're trying to get data and metadata into the hands of end users, both inside our organizations and our outside customers, so that they can make better business decisions, right? But it's just proven to be really difficult. It's proven to be, in many cases, a more expensive, time-consuming, and laborious effort than anyone wants it to be, or that it really can be in order to meet the challenge. So often, by the time that we've delivered a metadata management system, the business need has already moved on, right? So we need to do better. And that is where the idea of a semantic metadata hub comes in. And really, this is what Smartlogic and Semaphore have been pushing towards ever since our inception. And what do we mean by this? Well, first of all, we're talking about a metadata hub, which means we think it's important to gather metadata about all of our content into a place where it can be mined, right? But we want a semantic metadata hub. And how is that different than the other data warehousing or data grid or data lake or metadata hub projects you might have encountered in the past? Well, first, it's disruptive. We don't think the traditional approach has been working, and we're certainly not alone in this. Most of our customers or others in the market that we talk to have been frustrated by a lot of their projects, and vendors could also tell you that their initiatives with their customers often get hung up. So we need to disrupt that. How do we need to disrupt it? Well, we need a flexible system, not one that requires so much effort in order to support new data types, new use cases, new technical components. Let's see, I hear that my slides are not advancing. Here we go.
Better.
Good. I'm sorry that you didn't see the previous slide. That's an error on my part. Here's the Gartner information that I was displaying before. All right. So we are presenting a disruptive approach to metadata management. And as I said, we need one that will be flexible, right? So that when new data sources become available, when new kinds of information in the organization need to be pulled into the metadata hub, that can be done in a reasonable time frame with a reasonable amount of effort and investment so that the business can have the value that that presents as soon as possible. We need flexibility. We need to take a harmonized approach, and I'm sure many of you that know us have heard us talk about this before, and this is a general idea in the semantic space, right? Is that we're leveraging semantic technology as a way to reduce and make practical the amount of effort that it takes to map these many different data sources to each other. One of the big sort of stumbling blocks that existing systems often encounter is that investment of effort to map two fields together that are labeled in different ways from different systems so that you can search across them effectively. Well, if you have to do that for every field, either manually or even in a sort of semi-automated way, it really gets overwhelming. Our approach is quite different. Our approach is to enable and empower the business users in your organization to build a knowledge representation, a model that describes your business, that describes your domain, and that captures the many different ways that you as users talk about your domain, so that when new kinds of data flow into the system or new sources of data are provided, the system actually already knows about the different ways that you talk about things, so it can start to load that content and pull metadata from that content in a meaningful way without an inappropriate amount of investment on a rolling basis. We do rely on machine learning as well to take that content once we've already been able to identify what concepts it applies to, and to leverage that knowledge model in doing so. And that's what gets us the automation that's needed. But that machine learning is informed by the knowledge model that your experts have put together. Okay. So once you have this flexible and harmonized approach, that means you're also in a position to be enabling. And we think that a semantic metadata hub needs to be enabling of the users downstream who are actually trying to leverage the metadata. So that means providing tools to help them find what they need, but also then once they find results, to make sense of them and to put them in context. And that is something that the model, together with Semaphore, is able to do. So we think of that as meaning that we're bringing the semantics to the semantic metadata hub. In fact, we are happy for the second year in a row to be included in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for metadata management. And one of the things that Gartner emphasizes about us is that we have a unique vision as compared to the others that are in that quadrant. And in fact, to such an extent that we don't really compete with those vendors at all. Instead, we complement them. We augment what they're doing to bring the semantics into the metadata space. That's what we want to do, and we're really happy that Gartner has recognized that that is the position that we're trying to play. So again, that's about driving user insight and end user contextualization. And one of the outcomes of all of this is that our approach is pragmatic, brings results fairly quickly, and we end up having customers who choose us over and over again for new projects and new applications because we really bring the value to their organization. All right. So how specifically does Semaphore fit in? And I promise I'm close to done, and then we'll hand over to Jim for him to tell you a more concrete story about Semantic Metadata Hub and Semaphore. Well, there are 3 ways that we fit in, but again, let's put the context out there. The goal is to take the documents, the data that are in your enterprise in many different systems and get them into the hands of end users so that they can use them to drive your business. So how do we get from here to there? Well, again, 3 roles that we play. The first is in building those models that I was talking about. So these semantic models describe your domain, your data, your use cases, whatever needs to be described in order to get to that end user value. Those models are leveraged, as I said, by our software that performs data interpretation. And so what does that mean? It means you've got documents flowing in, you've got data flowing in, and our software is able to take the knowledge in that model, use its awareness of linguistics, and identify concepts and other metadata that is useful to downstream users. That also includes fact extraction, which is a fairly new capability for us that some of you may not have encountered before. Jim's going to talk a bit about it today, but I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with fact extraction, to reach out to us to learn more, because we think it, in combination in particular with classification of concepts, is really, really powerful. All right, so we've described your business model. We've used that along with our software to harvest this metadata and facts. Now, in the context of the end user, that model can also be used to surface knowledge and help your users to discover what they're looking for. So that takes the form of tools in your end user environment, whether it's SharePoint or a custom CMS, a CRM, whatever kind of system it might be, providing tools to users in that context to find what they're looking for and to make sense of what they're looking for. That's our role in the abstract. If you figure out where that fits in the architecture, it can be one of many ways. We strive very much to be flexible in architecture. We are integrating with the metadata management repositories that you might use, the ETL systems you might use. We frankly don't care much what other components you're using, as long as they can integrate through our APIs. That's usually a pretty straightforward integration. We have integrations with a lot of the common systems out there, but we want you to be able to put together the components of your system into a solution that makes sense for your goals in the context of your technology and your infrastructure. So again, the foundation might be getting your source data and documents over to a data hub. And very typically, our customers would use our classification software to get metadata and facts over into that hub. And that integration can happen through API and could happen at the point of ETL. It could happen actually being called from the data hub. You can plug that in to your flow, however it makes sense given your business. We would also plug in then through API to your downstream systems. Again, that could be the data hub itself. It could be additional end user systems who are calling on our semantic enhancement server API to get the kind of information needed to guide users through their knowledge discovery process. But you can also start to plug Semaphore components in ways that might be less expected. So for example, if your model is changing over time in significant ways, you might want to have the metadata that you're harvesting, or maybe in particular some of the facts that you're harvesting out of your content, automatically fed into your model to further enrich your model with new labels for existing terms, new values for products, for example, or other kinds of information that that your end users want to be able to use in downstream services. So that can be another way that you use Semaphore in your architecture. And in fact, that model, if you're enriching it so much over time, you might choose to use it in a way that's a little different than I've been talking about so far. So rather than focus on the end user tools, you might want the model itself to act as a catalog of your other systems. So you might ingest that model directly into one of your downstream systems, into your data hub. And you might not even load your source data and documents into that hub, because that catalog can instead act as a way that you can give your users access to the original source systems. Right? So there's lots of ways here that we can choose to architect a solution using Semaphore, and that not only gives you the ability to be flexible in your approach in a way that works to achieve exactly your goals, but it also allows you to attack the problem incrementally. You don't have to do everything at once. Semaphore really is very straightforward to integrate into your environment, and that can allow you to get to results before you have tried to boil the ocean, as people like to say. So that's how Semaphore fits into the idea of a semantic metadata hub, and that's what we mean by a semantic metadata hub. Now, Jim is going to take over, and he is going to give you a detailed explanation of how one customer has leveraged Semaphore to do this in the area of logistics and transportation. And I will just remind you, as Jim is taking over, that we are recording this, and we will share the recording with you later, but also we will have Q&A time later. So if you have questions so far, please go ahead and plug those into the questions area, and we'll get to those towards the end. All right, Jim, I am handing over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. So this use case I'm going to be talking through, it's an active project with the client. So I've made these slides generic. We won't be mentioning anybody specifically, but we're really excited to share it with you, because it really speaks to the everything that Lisa was describing about our capabilities and where we fit into this space of metadata and data hub deployment. And it also just represents the type of challenges that people are using Semaphore for across our clients in different industries. They all have similar challenges that Semaphore can address. And in this use case, we'll be highlighting two specifically. One is fact extraction. Lisa mentioned that, and that's really about making data that is locked in documents explicit as data or metadata to be leveraged and processed. And then how do we integrate that with other structured or database information sources? And that's the second challenge. How do we Semaphore help address that by applying our semantics? So this is specifically about this challenge is about the pharmaceutical industry and the task they have to get medicines to patients safely, effectively, and in compliance with their own procedures and regulations around the world. And it's a very complicated logistics challenge, as you can imagine. And of course, I've simplified it significantly here. I am not a logistics expert, so. But it starts with a product being produced, and that has to get to where it's needed. So they could be distributors, other end destinations. So the medicines are put in containers. Medicines are very delicate, sensitive materials, so they have to be packaged in a specific way, and they are then shipped off to different places by on the road or in the air, etc., until they reach their destination. Now, to manage this whole process, there are standard operating procedures within an organization that help govern how this happens. And there's something called a lane that is it's a description of a route. So defining how something gets from here to there, and all the parameters that are required for it to get there. So it includes, what type of transportation is acceptable, how long can it take, what type of container it needs to have, who are the, what is the shipping company, what is the origin, what is the destination. Every detail about that is included in this document, and it is a document that has to be used to find this. And then along the road, well, there's one more thing. This is all highly governed by regulations in different parts of the world. So as this product is moved around, there may be varying regulations on how products are stored, how they're delivered, how long they can sit around, etc. So that all feeds into the standard operating procedures and these lane descriptions. So that challenge of making sure that these documents remain compliant with shifting regulations is another part of this. So how do we make sure that we're being, how do we check to make sure that we are in compliance and that we're meeting the expectations laid out in the SOP and other documents? Well, we collect data. It's all about data, right? So at every point in the process, we are collecting data, and that can be, how long did it get there? When did it leave the warehouse? When did it arrive? But also in transit. Some of these things are products are very sensitive to temperature and so forth. So the containers themselves have sensors that are collecting information. So that's part of the data picture as well. So we need to be able to ask questions like, so based on all the data we've collected on this route over time, how does it measure against the expectations in the lane description? So there's data in that lane document that needs to be part of this picture. Now, so that's where all the data and the description of the lane. Let's back out a bit and go back to just the data. And what we have is a bunch of files, or they could be collected in different databases. And in order to answer these questions of how we're meeting our expectations defined in the lane, all this data needs to be aggregated. And how do we do that? Well, we would probably collect it into a hub of some sort. And this could be a data hub where the data itself is ingested and used. Or it could be a metadata hub where just the information about where the data is and what the fields are, et cetera, is stored. And then, as you need the data, it goes and retrieves it. In this particular project, Smartlogic, the system Smartlogic is actually used as the hub. And so I just want to give a shout out to Smartlogic. It's a fantastic tool that we've done a lot of projects with. And once this data is in Smartlogic, and then the challenge is then produce these dashboards, these analytics to gain business insights into how this lane is operating. So let's step back a second and look specifically at these documents. This first data challenge is the fact extraction challenge. So I'm just going to describe that in a bit more detail. So the statistic changes, but this is a data-driven century, right? It's all about data science, making decisions based on that. But the fact of the matter is, even in 2018, most of the data is in documents, legacy documents, current documents, these lane documents. So it could be 80% of the data you need to make decisions is in documents. And that's the real opportunity for fact extraction. And one way I like to describe this is, I like this picture of just you've got this big long document that has a lot of information in it, when actually there's data in there about your products, about your SOPs. They're all containing little elements of data, and the challenge is to get that data out and put it where it belongs. And maybe not for data processing. It could be for the data required for a submission to a regulatory body is required to be in a certain format, but the format you have it in the official approved regulated format of that information is a document that's intended to be read by a person. So fact extraction is to find that data and make it usable for whatever the downstream application is. And so Semaphore's fact extraction capabilities are unique because we're combining our different capabilities. And we've had fact extraction capabilities for a while, but we're really bringing that all together in a new component to our product, actually. So in 4.2, which is the Semaphore release coming out next month, the fact extraction framework, that we call it, is going to be included in the product. So it'll be a little plugin feature you can add to your Semaphore environment, and it provides we're all very model based, so it provides all the capabilities to access to our text mining, document fingerprinting, defining anchors in multiple languages, our part of speech and NLP engine playing a role in how you identify where things are in a document, how entities relate to each other. We add vocabularies to be able to identify known entities against unknown entities, or data elements that don't need to be modeled but have a vocabulary component like a product and its quantity, for example. So pulling those out as explicit data, and we call that our facts framework. So look forward to a lot more information about that. Our advanced training class coming up has a whole module specifically about our new framework. So we apply that in this use case. Let's go back to our lane document. So here's an example of what that lane looks like. Again, don't look too closely at the data because it's all kind of mocked up here, but we need to turn that into rows and columns that can then be processed and compared to other information and aggregated, so we can measure again how effective is this lane in when measured against the data that's collected all along the route. So again, we've got data in all these different sources, and we are trying to pull them all together. So this is the challenge number 2, is the semantic integration. So let's look more closely at this. So suppose we get our data together in one place, and that's great. So now we build our dashboards and we try to assess, aggregate this data together so that across the entire lane, how long did a journey take? What was the temperature variance? And how does that measure against what was defined in the lane description, for example? Well, and what we find out is there's a whole host of semantic challenges in this. And if all this was going into one database originally and it's all well controlled and you've got a really super data governance practice going on using one system, like it was 1980 or something, well then this data might aggregate more easily. But these are different suppliers, different organizations, companies, different systems collecting this data from all across the path. So immediately semantic challenges come to mind. So if we look at this more closely, here's our lane again, and each lane has a name. It's got origin, destination, mode, shipper, which is the same as a container, is their temperature control, etc. And so we're able to extract this information from the document. And this is an interesting challenge because the data can be in different places. There can be checkboxes. So does it require temperature control? Yes or no. It's a checkbox. It's not like we're just looking for text. we're really doing some sophisticated analysis of the document. But we have our data, and we've got our data that's being collected in the route. So we've got ordered information that's tracking the shipment, and that's got information about what was shipped by trade name, a ship, where it came from, where it went. And then we also have data collected en route, however you say that, with temperature variance collected at different times of the day on different parts of the journey. So if we could pull this all together easily, that would be great. But the fact is, we've got metadata variations and we have data variations. So in our lane description, we've got something called origin company name. And in our order data, we have something called shipping plant name. Well, they're the same thing. They're the same values, but they're called different. So just it's basic semantics there. Destination is called something different destination versus receiving, because a lane is defining, where it's going to go, and this database is saying where was it received. But the meaning is similar. Shipper versus container, two different names for that field. Transportation service provider, carrier, all different, all variants. But it's not just that. You look at the data itself, and we can see that, well, the Louisville Distribution Center and the Acme USA Inc. LDC, these are the same entities, but they're called different things. And this happens, just very, very frequently. It's just the nature of working with data, these variants. So when we see these things at Semaphore, we're like, it's a semantic challenge. Let's go after it. Let's create models that address these semantic variations and make them easily available to your systems to be able to use that. So that's what we do. And so I want to show you a bit about the model. So Semaphore, our approach to most problems is start with modeling what you know. Just avoiding the terms of taxonomy and ontology. You're just creating a model of what you know. What do you know so far? What data do you have that can build a semantic model or knowledge model to help address your challenges? So for example, we can take this lane information and we can build a model out of it. So here's a picture of that model for that particular lane. We've modeled it as a set of concepts in relationship to each other. So this particular model has these, and it's not all aspects of the document, it's just the key points that define, you might call it the fingerprint for, that's what our client calls it, the fingerprint for the lane. So it's the necessary information to make this lane unique, the destination, the origin, etc. So in this case, it's interesting because we're not just extracting this data and sticking it into a database and that's it. We're actually using it as part of the model itself. But then we extend it to say, okay, for carrier information, let's look at that in more detail. This UPS SCS, whatever that is. Well, if we model for that, we can see it's a shipper. In the center, we have that UPS SCS transportation company. But that is used by many different lanes, and it has many different names. So very clear semantics here. It's a type of company, so it's a carrier company. So there's some semantics there, and there's different labels. And these labels, again, as Lisa mentioned, we can collect information from the data and then map that into our model. To enrich it. And we have mapping capabilities and tools to help you do that. But it's also something that's very easy for a subject matter to review and say, yes, okay, yes, this is that company. Your knowledge workers and the people that actually are experts in this field can look at the model and make quick decisions. Again, looking at the destination, we identified that is has different variants. So again, we can see for that destination, it's used for different lanes. It has different labels, straight alternate labels, but also acronyms. location codes, even latitude and longitude, which could be used to map these locations on a map. Then one more looking at this one other example of the variance of a particular origin company. So we have this data. We've built models in Semaphore from that data that we've either extracted or we've pulled out of the systems that we're needing to integrate. And we've built a model that provides the means for this data to be aggregated. And only by doing that, by taking the information about the lane itself in these lane descriptions, combining it with the data that's being collected on the route, can we build these BI and analytics dashboards and do other types of work with the data to answer the essential questions. Now, of course, this work, is done anyway, but it's done in a very time-consuming way by people, manually integrating the data. Each data scientist has to, deal with the different semantic variants themselves, and it can be, it's very time-consuming to get that right. Whereas if you're able to aggregate the data, you can ask questions like, are our shipments meeting the requirements of our SOPs? Are there opportunities for gaining additional efficiencies in the time it takes for things to get where they're going? Are there geographical considerations that we need to take into account? Products, we haven't mentioned products. We're shipping things with names around the world, so we could use that to identify, which lanes are used for which products and how long does it take, etc. And I mentioned products because that is a very common vocabulary use of Semaphore, especially in any industry, but I'm most familiar with the pharma industry. So, product names can have a lot of variance from their generic names to their different brand names, etc. So most of our pharma clients, one of the key elements of data that they're managing in Semaphore are products, information about their products and their indications and all that. And so here we're using this whole lane challenge, this whole logistics challenge, and we're reusing, leveraging that information that we're already managing in Semaphore, so that we can easily use whatever term is appropriate to aggregate that data. Another challenge is I need to create a new lane. Well, is there already one that meets that requirement? So that's where this fingerprint can come into play. And I can say, oh, I need a lane that goes from here to there, and it has these temperature controls because I'm shipping a particular product. So, well, I can look, map that against Semaphore and say, we already have a lane described for that. Even if I'm using different terms to describe these lanes, I've got a Semaphore model that accounts for that. We didn't talk much about the regulatory side of it, but that's a big part of this. Regulations change. We need to be able to be sensitive to that, and make sure when we're aware of that, map that back to the SOPs and the lanes that regulation will have an effect on. So that's part of this challenge as well. A little more on this picture. I want to highlight the left-hand side. So this is all, the Semaphore-driven part where we've got a standard list of origins, destinations, and these are behind the scenes. This is going to connect to all the variants that might be needed to aggregate this data together. That's one approach. The other approach would be that the data itself is updated as it's read to the hub with the preferred terms. So all the data is already standardized once it gets into the data or metadata hub. But in either case, it's Semaphore managing that relationship between preferred terms and the terms that are actually used. And otherwise, if you were just using the data straight out of the box and building these filters, which systems can do, you're just going to get a big long list of terms that may be referring to the same entities. So it's a real problem. Things like trade names right out of the box, because most companies are managing their products in some type of Semaphore model. And then the data. So Semaphore doesn't manage numbers and and data, strictly speaking. So this is coming from our containers, our IoT sensors, and the order and receiving information. So we can filter the dates as well. So they can look at things, how are shipments, not just how long did it take, but how do they measure against the expectation of the lane description, as well as the variance in temperature, to make sure that the shipping companies and all the parties involved are conforming to our expectations. So that's where I want to end this. As I said, this is a project that we're working on right now, and it's really representative of a lot of the data challenges that we see, not just in pharma and life sciences, but other industries as well, finance and manufacturing and energy and so forth. So this just really spoke to us as a great example, and shows these two key capabilities of fact extraction, which is really exciting, and just adding semantics to the challenge of aggregating metadata and data to provide the answers you need. So with that, I'll turn it back to Lisa.
Great. All right. The first thing I want to say is that for those of you that heard Jim say, a semantic challenge, and thought he might have been sort of overstating that, that's actually not true. He speaks that way all the time, and in fact, it's one of the things I love most about working here is that we do in fact get excited about semantics and figuring out ways to use the Semaphore to solve those problems. So join us. You too can face semantic challenges with joy. All right, so I see a few questions here from some of you, and we'll start going through those. If any questions occurred to you previously or now, please do go ahead and enter them, and we'll see how many we can get to. So, Jim, first off, a couple of folks have asked about more concretely in terms of this customer and how they're using Semaphore. How long did it take them previously to do what they were doing, and how long does it take or will it take with Semaphore to get the kind of questions that they have about lanes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have exact figures, but I know it was several. It was a lot of people over a lot of time to on a regular basis, some periodic basis. Okay, time to do our analysis of the particular lanes, and the data has the data not from the lanes descriptions themselves, but all the other data is there, and they can pull that together. But it's really the challenge was making the connections between all those and okay, being aware of the semantic variations and addressing that. And then individual reports are written that summarize, okay, here's the status of lane XYZ and how we're doing. And whereas with being able to build the models, the effort is in having the models available and designing them in a way that they're effective. But then, that's done once. Not every time you need to aggregate the data. You build the models quickly using the data you already have, and then you use subject matter experts to maintain it. And then the dashboards build themselves, in combination with a tool like Smartlogic that is, has the capability for quickly building those types of applications. Right. And Semaphore, fits perfectly into that ecosystem, whether you're querying the Semaphore data directly or Semaphore's putting its data into Smartlogic, where it can be just pulled together dynamically just within Smartlogic. But the user interface and the curation of the data happens in Semaphore.
Okay. That actually leads pretty naturally into a group of other related questions about scalability and effort here. So one of the questions is, in regards to the the knowledge models that we keep talking about. That sounds like this enormous effort. Can you talk a bit about how that actually plays out for customers and how it relates also to the rest of the work that needs to be done in order to get a system like this up and running?
Sure. Semaphore's design philosophy is to put as much control over how Semaphore operates in the hands of subject matter experts. So we take that seriously because we believe they play the critical role in effective information management and data science. So we have a suite of tools available and capabilities to bring data into Semaphore quickly and easily, and to be able to socialize that, to be able to get people contributing from across the organization, as needed, to ensure those models are available and kept up to date. So the time frame for building these models can vary depending on the complexity of the challenge, but our goal is to make that as effective and easy as possible. So it's hard to say without specifics of different challenges. This was for this particular project, in the work they've done, I'd say it's only a matter of a few days, to a week to pull the data in was necessary to show those dashboards, and then maintaining it over time. Again, I say that's we have tools that map in content or data from other sources. It's extensible, so we can actually link out to other information from inside of Semaphore. And of course, we have tools to enable subject matter experts to interact with it very easily. The second part of your question about how it relates to other parts of the process. Each we don't like. I think you mentioned this. We're not a disruptive. Well, I guess we're disruptive in the way of adding semantics.
The approach is disruptive, but we don't. Yeah, but not. but we don't disrupt your environment.
Exactly, we fit with the ecosystem you have. That's the idea. So you have database systems that are collecting this information. We're not requiring you to rip and replace everything and stick our solution in its place. We're designed to integrate with what you have, and that's something we feel very strongly about. Which is why our approach in the metadata quadrant, we say, well, if you have a system that is operating your data hub already, we work with that.
And that actually ties to another question, which is in regards to the scalability of metadata management as a solution overall. And I would clarify first that we're not managing the metadata that is produced, right? So that the concern about scaling and supporting performance for that is not in Semaphore's area of concern. A tool like Smartlogic, as we were describing, could be used there. Right?
Yeah, and that's true, and that's true for the most part. You're needing to manage like tons of data from all your sensors and equipment all over the world. Yeah, the Smartlogic is a great tool for being able to handle that information very quickly. But the line between metadata and data can get a little blurry, and that like in this example, we are creating a model in Semaphore that includes the essential information about the lanes. So is that data or is that metadata? Well, it describes the lane. It has standard terminology for the fields that are in the metadata. So that's managing that, but how it applies to the data to do your analytics, that's I guess that's the magic. Right. So if you put in Semaphore what makes sense to put there to meet the challenges you have. Yeah.
And if we continue that conversation, then in a way that I think this person may have been asking about, there's also the consideration of the throughput for the actual classification or fact extraction that we're performing, and being able to scale that, which I know we do pretty well. In fact, one of our customers really massive requirements in that area just went live, and it's always fun to see that. Can you talk, I guess, a bit to how we scale in terms of throughput and processing?
Sure, yeah, and fact extraction, if you're analyzing large documents and you're looking for specific facts, you're doing a lot of analysis in the process of extracting that information where it's it requires processing. But the design of Semaphore, that this is all done by our component, the classification service component, and that was designed from the ground up to scale. So it can just scale out, vertically or horizontally, and adding more cores, running on bigger machines, giving it more memory. It scales out to whatever the capacity is that you require in terms of the number of documents and the sophistication of the rules that are operating. There's really no limit to its to the scale that it can go to. We've never hit a limit that can't
I
be
was going to say,
accounted
I
for.
sense all of the technical experts on the line now are thinking, I can find that limit. But yeah,
Well,
there hasn't been a practical limit for us, right? Yeah.
Well, we encourage people to work with us, before they start, throwing the world's information at Semaphore. Ask us what the right scaling solution would be for it. But yeah, that's part of our engagement.
Great. Moving on to a slightly different area, got some interest in facts here in particular, which, as we've noted, is a bit newer. I think based on what I'm seeing, it might be helpful for you to talk a bit about how the work is actually done of sort of configuring the system to identify facts in a set of documents or data that's coming through. Can you just talk to that a bit? I don't think we're ready to show, but
our approach is we're basically just replicating what a person does when they read a document. How do you know that a particular paragraph contains a mention of an adverse event, in a clinical setting? Well, you would read the document. You might already have a context for the document, saying, that this pile of documents has medical information in it, so that gives you some context. We model that, if that makes sense. And then in a paragraph, we'll have certain types of concepts in relationship to each other. It'll have something indicating a patient. It'll have something indicating a medicine of some sort or a treatment, and it will have some type of clinical event. So these things appear in the context of each other using certain language, and that's how we know when we read it that there's a fact here. There's a piece of data that indicates an adverse event to a drug or a treatment. So that's what we model, and we model as effectively as we can, because a fact like what I just described could appear anywhere in any document. So that would be fairly open-ended. But in other types of documents, like maybe these lane documents or product description documents, they follow a consistent pattern. So in that case, it's very effective to look for anchors, headings, things like that. So it's a matter of taking samples of what the documents look like, and designing the most effective rules. But the whole idea behind the framework, and like I said, under the hood, Semaphore had a lot of these capabilities for a while. But the idea of the framework, again, going back to the design philosophy of Semaphore, is to put all that in the hands of subject matter experts. So that's what the framework does. It allows you to quickly identify, well, what type of, how is this fact represented in documents? What are the variations on how this fact could be represented in documents? And there's a whole slew of choices you can make. Oh, it's this type of extraction, this type of extraction. It's using these types of vocabularies. It's in relationship to these other facts that we're finding. So the modeling is facilitated greatly, and we've made a number of enhancements to Semaphore specific to facilitate the building of those models. And we have this is an ongoing development area for Semaphore in terms of how we continue to evolve that process and applying more machine learning in addition to what we're already using to be able to look at a corpus and make some of those decisions. But it comes into again having a model that then could be managed by subject matter experts. So if you're mining a huge amount of data and you've got anomalies out there, a new name for a product that just appears out there, and you need to quickly adjust your model to account for that, you just update the model and you're done. There's no training, there's no learning. So it's we really believe strongly in that this approach is the most effective and way to go about these types of challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are just about out of time. We have time to sneak in a couple more. One of them, only because I know it'll go fast, is does Semaphore support data lineage tracking? And I think the short answer to that is no, because we're typically integrating an environment where that feature would be provided by one of the other components. But Jim, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, data lineage, identifying how data changes over time. So you've got a bunch of systems that all are collecting the same type of data. Are those systems changing as the nature of the data change? I mean, I'm not an expert on data lineage, but you're right. That's very much the specialty of systems the metadata systems that that focus on that. But semantics help with that too. Because again, it comes down to, well, are all your fields across all your systems named something that can be easily aggregated together, so you can see data lineage across systems that are supposed to be talking about the same thing. So semantics come into play there, or right. Data elements of a certain type in relationship to some other concept. So again, Semaphore plays a role in effectively making use of that data lineage.
Great, which is, so often the role that we're playing, right? Which is making the capabilities of the other systems actually work the way that people wish they would work. I have a challenge for you, then. 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And I know this will be hard because you actually like this topic, which is what happens if you start to discover that the facts from different sources are in conflict with each other, that it appears that you're getting different information from different systems flowing through fact extraction? What might one do?
Yeah, well, that's a perfect application of fact extraction. Yeah, identify variance in what you're extracting. When we look at labeling in pharmaceuticals, that's a use case we've looked at with clients where you need to make sure that what is put on a product labeling, its box or its prescribing information, et cetera, is consistent across all regions according to the approvals that are relevant to that product in that country or region. And if something changes, suppose some new adverse event is discovered, and so you actually have to update information about that product. You need to be able to identify where that needs to be updated. So the fact extraction collects all that information, and then we can the facts can be known facts or unknown facts. If we're looking for this drug is expected to have a dosage amount next to it or nearby according to some semantics. This thing doesn't. This document does not have that. So or it has something we're not expected. It has a name of a product that we haven't seen before. We collect that and flag it, and we could feed that back into Semaphore as extra information that needs to be assessed in the context of the model. Is this a valid value that needs to be added to a model, or is it a data error that needs to be corrected in the source?
Yeah. Great. So I know that you could keep talking about that, but we are out of time. So I will just remind you that following the end of the webinar here, we will be sending out a link to the recording when it's ready. So please feel free to share that around. If you have any questions about Semaphore and particularly some of the new features you might be hearing about, please reach out to us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, and talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.